So you've had enough. Not I'm kind of frustrated enough, but actually like genuinely ready to fix enough. So you sit down, maybe with the coach, maybe with the journal, you map the whole thing out. So we're talking the food, the timing, the grocery list, meals you'll prep Sunday. You block the workouts into the calendar. You've thought of everything, and I got to admit the plan looks pretty solid. There's just one thing that's missing. The person who has to execute it is nowhere to be found. And I'll explain. That person is not you right now. Now, the one who's creating these goals, you're fine. You have momentum, you have clarity. You even got like a little righteous indignation from your past self that I think is actually pretty healthy. And you can feel how ready you are. The person I'm referring to is the other you. This is the one that exists at Thursday at like 6:47 p.m. There's no dinner anywhere in sight. You get home later than you want. You have more work left than you can finish in 3 weeks. And lucky you, you're running on like 5 hours of sleep because your kid threw up last night. So that person, as you made these goals, it wasn't in the room. There's no bit from Seinfeld where he talks about late night Jerry and early morning Jerry, and it may be more accurate than any behavioral economist, and I think it's worth finding. There's a philosopher. His name's Derek Parfit. I think that's how you pronounce it. That's spent a career making this formal case for what Seinfeld made funny, and it's this: that your future self is not you, at least not in any robust sense. Is not a version of you that you can just simply instruct now. It's closer, as he says, to like a stranger that you're responsible for, someone whose circumstances you can anticipate, but you can't really control from the present. So, no, that feels a little heady, but all that to say is that there's this gap, I believe, that exists between the self who is making these decisions now and the self who has to live with what you're deciding. We talk about that gap in health and wellness like it's a motivational issue. Like if you just wanted it badly enough, the two versions of you would somehow align. But I believe that motivation isn't what's missing here, because you had plenty of it when you sat down to make the plan. What's missing is the other cosigner. Think about that for a sec. Goals feel like a really beautiful design, right? They have the structure of design, there's specificity, there's intention, there's a clear picture of this desired outcome. And I think for most of us, that feels like the hard part. But the thing to remember is that a goal isn't a blueprint. It's more or less like a contract. And every contract requires two parties. So present you sets the terms. Future you has to honor them. We're going to be saying that back and forth a little bit. Present you has full information, high energy, zero competing demands right now. This is all that matters in your life. But future you will have different information, different energy, and a room full of like competing demands. Present you is calm, running on the neurochemistry of a fresh decision. Future you is going to be tired, hungry, emotionally loaded. There's going to be some social pressure. And that future you is going to be operating on a depleted prefrontal cortex. All that to say is they're not the same person. Now, I'd like for you to think that I just came up with that, but this is actually insight from game theory. It's not a metaphor. It's more like the mechanics. If you ever taught about the prisoner's dilemma, it references two parties, separate decisions, different incentives, and in the classic version, both players defect because they can't trust the other to cooperate. The reason I bring that up is that we don't often examine the version where one player is you and so is the other. And so present you cooperates with the plan, future you defects, and not from weakness, but from the circumstances that we talked about. So you made this goal assuming that future you shares your current resolve. Future you doesn't share your current resolve. Future you may not even remember that you wrote this stuff down because nothing in that situation is the same. The hunger, the social pressure, the emotional weight of whatever that day is. I think that the bigger the ask, the more cooperation you're demanding from a party that has no incentive to give it. And when future you defects, you call it a willpower failure. But again, I don't think it was. It was a predictable outcome of a contract the other party was never in a position to honor. So write this down. Ambition without architecture is just optimism with the deadline. So the question isn't how do you make future you comply. That framing is already lost. The question is, what would have already put future you in a cooperative position before the decision arrives? This is what it means to reason backwards. So not from the goal, but from the motivation you have right now, from the actual circumstances you can expect future you to face. In other words, think through like worst case scenario. What will the day have already cost future you? Who's going to be there when you're trying to weigh and measure your food? How tired are you going to be when you tell yourself that you need to stay up and watch some Netflix just to decompress from the day? So you're not lowering the standard, but you're designing for reality instead of for this best case version of yourself that actually rarely shows up on schedule. To give you a really clean illustration, think of when we say that we want to eat clean. The goal is less food. Now, on paper, that looks beautiful. In practice, it puts future you in direct opposition to hunger, social pressure, and even the emotional context of a meal with those that you care about. It requires willpower at that exact moment where willpower may be the least available. Now let's take that worthy goal and let's just change the thing that we're asking ourselves. Instead of eat clean, the instruction becomes eat slowly. So we're treating each meal as a chance to relax, savor the food, decompress. Now what's interesting is the physiology is very similar. Eating slow triggers the signals of satiation. You end up eating less regardless of what's on the plate, but the experience is completely different. One feels like punishment. Oftentimes when we say eat clean, it feels like we're being restrictive. The other feels more like permission. Hey, you get permission to relax. You get permission to slow down. And so where one puts future you in conflict with the goal, the other puts future you more in agreement with it. The person who never gives a mandate to eat clean, but always eats slowly, I would want to bet money they can keep that up much better than the person who tells themselves that they have to eat clean no matter what. The objection here when I give an example like that is, man, are you just making this too easy? Are you giving future you an out? And I think the answer is no. We're just changing the nature of the game. Now back to the prisoner's dilemma. If it's a one-time game, then defection is really rational. But in a game that you're going to play over and over and over again, it makes sense to cooperate. That becomes like the dominant strategy. Now, you don't cooperate because you're full of virtue. You're cooperating because the terms actually make that possible. It's possible to do. I think it's a great way to think of just most healthy behaviors in general It's not that the goal was wrong, but the game was structured for a single play. And most of these things we're trying to set up, we need a repeated game. We need a different kind of ask. And that right there is your second move. You know what I'm saying? If dinner is at 6 p.m., there's a few decisions that you need to make at 2 p.m. and at 4 p.m. And so the hours preceding that ask is when it really matters what stress looks like, whether it compounded or whether there's some release valves for it. You want to show up to that decision with a lower allostatic load, as it's called. And if you do, future you is in a fundamentally different negotiating pattern. There's more bandwidth, you're less reactive, and it doesn't feel like you got to white knuckle anything. This is what we call distributing the load. Instead of concentrating all the demand at that one moment of decision, you're going to spread it upstream. And there's lots of habits and lots of choices that if we make like the minimum effective dose, it can make the whole design run a little bit more efficiently. This summer, there's a movie coming out with the story of the Odyssey and Odysseus. And if you remember that story, there's a part of that where he didn't even trust his future self. He really wanted to hear the song and the sirens, but he's like, man, if I hear that, I'm going to run these guys into a rock and we're all going to die. So he had himself tied to the mast. Now, if you've read the Odyssey, Odysseus is not weak. There's nothing weak about him. But I think it was like an accurate self-knowledge that was put to work. The structure did what resolve like couldn't. And that's the model. So before you commit to any behavioral goal, audit the ask. Under genuinely bad circumstances, when you're tired, when you're behind, emotionally spent, surrounded by competing demands, would you trust future you to do this? If the honest answer is no, well, the ask needs to change. Not the effort, but the ask. So find the version that doesn't require circumstances to cooperate. Eat slowly instead of eat clean. Fresh air instead of, man, I've got to do this HIIT workout that you like eventually not be able to keep up. One friction point removed instead of one rule added. The best behavioral choices are executable under bad conditions. This isn't the path of least resistance, it's the path that actually runs. Distribute the load upstream. 1 or 2 points earlier in the day where you can reduce what you carry into the hard decision, not at the moment of choice, in the hours before it. You're not hoping future you will do the right thing. You're just like engineering the conditions under which the right thing is no longer like a hard thing. And then design for repetition, not heroics. The goal isn't this 30-day push. It's a behavior you can execute on a Wednesday in November when nothing is going right. The question isn't, can I do this? It's, can I do this every time, including the times that look nothing like today? Every goal you set and abandon wasn't evidence of failure. It was the evidence of a contract that never had a second signature.